Yo soñaba muchas veces con tocar el cielo, con los ángeles muy cerca estar contigo, con solo besar tus labios eres cielo.
I was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco. My parents were Carlos Haro and my mother was Alicia Rubalcaba Moreno. We lived there in Guadalajara for at least 4 years. And from there, my parents made a decision to move to Nogales, Sonora, because my dad was a radio announcer and he saw more opportunities on the border where my grandmother, Carmen Lazo, was already living. And she told him that there were opportunities for him at the local radio station in Nogales, Sonora. When the family arrived in Nogales, Sonora, my father found a job at a radio station, at one of the local radio stations. But besides that, he was always very entrepreneurial and he established several businesses during the time we were in Nogales. One of the ones I remember was a roller skating rink, one of those made of wood. He also owned a cabaret, and besides that, a shoe store and a movie theater called Cine Selecciones, which is where the story I'm going to tell you later about the Casablanca restaurant begins. The movie theater was called Cine Selecciones because when my father had to get his broadcaster's license, which at that time was required to work in radio, and the only place to get it was in Mexico City, he spent many years reading the Selection magazine every day, which contained short articles. He would just go back and forth to the bathroom. Wherever he went, he was always reading. So that magazine, Reader's Digest, was always very important to him. When he made the decision to open the movie theater, he took us there and told us the Cine Selecciones movie theater will be right across the street. I had mixed emotions because the movie theater was something that was full of fantasies, right? But at the same time, the location where the movie theater was located was across from a cemetery that still exists, which is the Municipal Cemetery of Nogales. So it was like the excitement of the movie theater and the fear of having the cemetery behind us. My siblings, Enrique, Marta, Maria, well, we had a great support system with my mother, who was always looking out for us. My father was a very restless person, always searching from a very young age. I think that was one of the, I wouldn't say mistakes, but it was one of the inconsistencies in his life because he was very young. And in his youth, he wanted to find out what satisfied him the most. So he ended up selling all these businesses, right? He sold a roller skating rink, and then he opened the cabaret. After that, he opened the movie theater. After the movie theater, the shoe store. And in between, he did a series of things, right? Doing advertising businesses with banners, selling religious paintings. My father with that restlessness, he had to make something of his life. He moved on his own, looking for a better opportunity. We stayed in Nogales because he, being a radio announcer, wanted to continue his profession. And my grandmother, again, who was the one who pulled the strings in the family, told him she was already in Los Angeles. And she said, you know what? There are opportunities in radio, but that time there were only 2 stations that broadcast in Spanish. And my father tried to find an opportunity, but the space was very limited to work at the radio station. So he found, as I already said, ease, his reason for staying, to find something that was truly good for his spirit, for himself. And he opened his first restaurant in 1959, which was called El Rincón Maya. He was very restless, but he couldn't find what he really liked, you know? So I think that when he arrived in Los Angeles and opened his restaurant, I think he found this path, what he had been looking for, because it was the only thing he didn't sell and with which he sustained himself for the rest of his years. We stayed in Nogales and had a childhood like many others. Very pleasant, with friends that I still keep in touch with after all these years. And I learned something there during that time. I learned that with little, one can be very happy, and that has helped me a lot throughout my life. That way of thinking that you don't need much to be very happy. As I was with my friends in Nogales, Sonora. In 1967, I graduated from the Federal High School in Nogales, and my mother made the decision to go with me and support me because I wanted to study at the Autonomous University of Guadalajara and become a lawyer. We moved in 1967 and then returned again to the city of Guadalajara, Jalisco, the whole family. There, I studied law. I was passionate about basketball from a young age. I played a lot of basketball. So I continued playing basketball and studying law. When I graduated as a lawyer, I also decided to become a basketball coach. And I practiced law for about 6 or 7 years in combination with being a basketball coach. Ultimately, the legal profession wasn't what I expected. I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. And I decided to stay solely as a basketball coach, working for the Autonomous University of Guadalajara, where I coached the #1 team, the most important team at the university, and I was with them for approximately 3 or 4 years. Then the opportunity arose to come to Los Angeles to continue advancing in my basketball studies. And I came here in 1977 to take courses to try to return to the university better prepared. When I arrived here, my brother, who had a restaurant called La Choza, invited me to stay with him while I was here taking basketball courses. I started to become interested in the restaurant, and when I decided to leave after the first year, my brother asked me why I didn't request an extension to stay another year so he could take a trip, his first trip to Europe. I supported him. I stayed here. And when I wanted to return to Guadalajara, there had already been many changes in the sports department at the university, and it was no longer possible to return to the university, and I was already a little hooked on the restaurant business. So I decided that the most important thing for the family was whether to go back and start from scratch in Guadalajara or start here in the family business. And that was the decision we made. When I moved to study basketball in 1977, I received the support of my wife because she is a biologist and was part of the faculty at the Autonomous University of Guadalajara of the entire teaching staff. So it wasn't, we already had 2 children, a daughter, Anali, and my son, Carlos. And we made the decision for me to come for a year to study so I could return to Guadalajara afterwards. But as I explained, things didn't turn out the way we thought. And so I made the decision to move the whole family to Los Angeles. In 1978, or towards the end of 1978, I petitioned my family, but we need to come here. Difficult for my wife because I was living here well, like most people, trying to make ends meet, a small apartment, a used car that barely ran, a profession as a lawyer, and suddenly becoming a busboy. That was a huge shock for my father because he never wanted us to be restaurant owners, and even less that we would start from being, let's say, dishwashers and cleaning the restaurant, etc., etc. So it was very hard blow for my father and for my family to have to move here. But they supported me, and they arrived here in Los Angeles more or less in 1979. When I decided to stay, so I said to myself, I'm going to look for an opportunity to move forward, right? I knew that what my dad wanted was for us not to be in the position we were in, that we would improve. Because he always told me, well, if you're going to do what you're going to do, then be the best, right? Something I think I heard many times from other families. So I decided, well, if I've already made the decision to be in the restaurant business, then I'm going to do the best I can and try to keep moving forward as I learn. And that's what I did. I received a lot of support from my brother Enrique, who already had much more experience, even though he was younger than me, and he supported me, and we opened our first business, which was called El Taco Loco, which was a taco stand that at that time wasn't as popular as they are today, right? So my wife and I opened the taco stand called El Taco Loco. We were there for about 2 years trying to make ends meet. And during that time, my dad opens Casablanca, and with a lot of pressure because there were already two businesses. It was starting over in something new. And unfortunately, he has a stroke very young. He was about 49 years old. My dad, and he recovers fortunately well from the stroke, but with speech problems. And the doctor tells him, well, there are two options. You continue in the restaurant and you have a short life, or you take life more easily. You take breaks, which is almost impossible to do in the restaurant business. But he made the decision that he was going to retire from the restaurant for a while, and he looked for someone who could take over the Casablanca restaurant, which was just starting out. And he thought of my brother, Enrique, who was the most prepared, the one with the most experience. And he said, well, I can't do it. I have my own restaurants, which was very successful. And he recommended me. I said, well, let Carlos do it. I don't know if he still held on to that idea that a lawyer had come to be a restaurant owner. But anyway, I talked to him and he gave me the opportunity, and I took over Casablanca in 1981. Towards the end of 1981, almost a year after my father opened Casablanca, I think my father, who was a man with a lot of experience in the business, knew how difficult it was going to be for me, since I didn't have the same experience that my brother already had in the restaurant business. Because I came from a taco stand where the service wasn't at the table, to Casablanca, which at that time was a restaurant that we could call a luxury restaurant, what they call here fine dining. And it was learning again how to manage staff, how to manage a business that I wasn't used to. And I had to learn by asking questions, reading. In short, to be able to adapt to what Casablanca was like. We had a maitre d', we had a head waiter, we had waiters. In short, it was a completely different business, right? Valet parking anyway. But, well, over time, I more or less learned everything that was needed to try to keep the business going. And besides, I loved the Casablanca idea. The idea of Casablanca was an idea that had been around for a long time, that suddenly we who stood in front of the movie theater to see that illusion of the movies, well, we had Casablanca here, right? Hollywood. And since we were one of the new famous Mexican restaurants with a different style of cuisine, so as not to compete with the one across the street, which was my father's other restaurant, well, with a menu that people weren't used to seeing here as Mexican food. So we had a lot of people from Hollywood, athletes, etc., etc. And then for me to see those personalities that I saw on the screen in the movie theater Selecciones, to see them here and have them call me by my name, well, it was very, very rewarding. I felt like I was already the owner of the world, the owner of something, of a dream that started in front of the cemetery and that was now coming true here in Los Angeles. The restaurant business is very difficult because you have to be here 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day, living your dream. But what has been very important to me, what has given me strength, has been accomplishing certain things. Writing books, writing different short stories, writing songs without being a writer, without being a composer. I've had the opportunity to do it. Like the last song, which was in collaboration with one of my musicians, Juan Ornelas, and which is titled In My Solitude.
En mi soledad, solo pienso en ti y mirando las estrellas y me veo bailar contigo. En mi soledad, solo pienso en ti. Con solo tocar tus labios, solo quiero estar contigo en la eternidad.
In another of my hobbies, I include one of my mantras, which is, if you can laugh at yourself, no one will be able to make fun of you. That's why I created the character El Super Chef. A character that appeared on Telemundo for a long time, thanks to my friend Jose Armando Ronstadt, who at that time was a general manager and who, thanks to the Super Chef program, he was fired. You might be wondering, what was the Super Chef character? A great chef? No. It was a character who imitated a superhero, who went around the streets, who was chased by dogs, and who had guests from all over the world, chefs from all over the world, but they never gave any recipes. That was a Super Chef. I think ego is something human. Ego. I think ego is one of the most terrible things that can happen to a person. But you don't know it until you experience it, right? You see it, for example, in actors, singers, athletes, in how ego sometimes destroys careers. I was on top of the world because Casablanca was one of the most popular places, with publications all over the United States, some even outside the United States. So I thought that I was the one that knew best, that there was no one that could tell me what to do, not even my dad. So I lived in that world where I was Mr. Carlos, the celebrities, etc., etc. And there came a point where that ego prevented me from seeing that in 1990 or during the Gulf War. I don't remember if it was around 92. A very big crisis hit here. So the restaurants that suffered the most were those that were high-end, let's say, more expensive, to put it that way. Those had more problems, and I got caught up in it. Casablanca. But since my ego was so big, I thought it was me. So I made the decision to almost stop coming. I stopped coming altogether. I was even afraid to go into Casablanca. I felt that my ego was the one that had suffered the most. I was the fool. I had ruined a business that was successful and well known. And by not being there, well, a restaurant like ours, a family restaurant like ours, if you're not attentive, things go from 10 to 0, which is what happened to us, what happened to me. One night, I was talking to the guys. I said, I think I'm going to close. I talked to my brother, and we decided that maybe it was one of the best options. And I got home and I said, I think tomorrow we're not going to open Casablanca anymore. My wife says, well, you know what? I think that's not a good idea, because that restaurant isn't just any ordinary restaurant. It's something very personal to you. It's something that's your life. You have to see it through. Let's go back to working like before, and I think things will improve. And we started again with new ideas, new ways of trying to bring more money into the business. By improving what had already gone wrong and working again 10 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it took us about 6 years or more to get back to the level of when Casablanca was most successful. For those who don't know, Casablanca restaurant is a restaurant based on the movie Casablanca, a themed restaurant, and we can consider it the oldest movie-themed restaurant in the world. This is the lamp, one of the original lamps that were used in Rick's Cafe. This is a copy of the script of the movie Casablanca, signed by one of the twin writers of the movie, Julius Epstein. This is one of the original chips from the casino at Rick's Cafe. This is the original program from when the Oscars were awarded, and Casablanca won 3 Oscars in 1943. Before they used to make the makeup and everything, they would make them a plaster mask. This is the original one of Humphrey Bogart that was used in the film. This is Humphrey Bogart's double, Mr. Robert Sacchi, who appeared in Casablanca about 25 times in a comedy show. I am very happy with what Casablanca is, with what we have achieved. It's not just about economic success, which is important because it's always important, but about the fulfillment that this restaurant has allowed me. It's not a restaurant that I feel is an ordinary restaurant. It's a restaurant that has allowed me to develop my dreams, to develop my creativity, and it has given me the opportunity, for example, to have those stars who were in that movie theater selections, to have the opportunity to have as friends that classic film called Casablanca, from which my father took the name. The opportunity to be with several of the survivors of the film, sitting here talking about the anecdote, about what happened in the film, to have a very strong friendship with one of them, so I could immerse myself in everything that the film was. That has been very important to me, besides the fact that it's given me the opportunity to do plays here, musicals, which nobody imagines how. To have the music, which was the passion of my family, right? Of all the Mexican people with tradition, music is part of our lives, as it has been present here throughout all these years. Having the opportunity to write books through that enthusiasm, that opportunity to travel to Mexico, that opportunity to share anecdotes with people, to be creative in the kitchen, to create new dishes, new flavors to offer to the people who are here with us. That's very important, isn't it? And participating with the community, giving the opportunity, for example, to have programs where students, especially elementary school students, could understand what reading is, preparing themselves to have the opportunity that one day they too can own a restaurant, a business, or have a successful career. Another challenge we've always faced has been the food critics. Today the situation is different with influencers and all that kind of thing. But previously, food critics from newspapers, radio, and television were the ones who determined whether you were successful.
Yummy, yummy.
Or not successful.
Ugh, disgusting.
So it was extremely important for us that they were happy and to invite them. For one of those occasions, one of them accepted our invitation. We were very happy. We wanted to prepare ourselves as best as possible. It's like when you go on a first date, you prepare yourself with your best clothes, your perfume, your smile. That's how we prepared ourselves. We tried to make the restaurant as perfect as possible, the kitchen too. We talked to the employees. We had decided that only one employee, one waiter would attend to that table, which would be for 4 people. But when I was checking things, I realized that the table where he was going to sit and where we were going to serve him, well, the chairs weren't what I wanted. They didn't look suitable for a food critic. I made the decision to go that same day in an emergency to a place to buy 4 very nice wicker chairs, the kind you'd have in a house, without considering that they weren't commercial chairs, but they looked very nice. It was all I could get at the moment, and I brought them back. I set up the chairs, we welcomed the critic, and oh, surprise, the critic weighed more than 240 pounds. At one point I said, well, no, it's no big deal. He sat down at the table. The service was excellent, the food excellent, there was laughter, everything was going very well. We were already breathing a sigh of relief when that wicker chair broke under the critic's weight and he fell to the floor, trying to lift not only our embarrassment, but also the critic was a struggle. It was embarrassing. We were even worse, scared and embarrassed. And it was a funny moment that fortunately didn't affect the criticism. But you have to think that, as I always said, nothing is perfect. We had planned it, but we didn't consider that those chairs were going to embarrass us. During the worst period of Casablanca, I've always thought that cinema, because it's part of my passion, if you look at the name, it provides many phrases that are very important. Casablanca is one of the films that provides very important quotes, but the one I've always taken as part of myself to be a stronger person was from one of Sylvester Stallone's films, not his best film, Rocky V. At the end, he is facing a boxer, himself already retired, in a street fight, and he falls to the ground. The other fighter leaves. He wants to leave, as if life is slipping away. He says, okay, I've already beaten him. And the character stands up and says, I need you to give me one more round. That's my philosophy, because with that one round, you can win the fight as it actually happened in the movie. Doesn't matter if you're down. It doesn't matter how many problems you have in life. You always have to ask life for one more round.
En mi soledad, solo pienso en ti y mirando las estrellas y me veo bailar contigo. En mi soledad, solo pienso en
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
En mi soledad, solo pienso en ti y mirando las estrellas y me veo bailar contigo. En mi soledad, solo pienso en ti. Con solo tocar tus labios, solo quiero estar contigo en la eternidad.